friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your co-host for today's show because you are tuning in to another episode of Lunch and Learn. So we actually separate our Lunch and Learn episode numbers from our main podcast episode numbers just for the sake of not being overly confusing. So this is Lunch and Learn number 6 with Detective Ev and Lucy McKellar. And what we're going to be talking about today is an intro to gut health. And if this is your first time clicking on one of our Lunch and Learns, just so you know kind of what our thought process is around this and what we're trying to do here, we are wanting to, over time, so 50 weeks, 60 weeks, 70 weeks, show you guys some of the main stuff from a high-level overview point of view that we learn in FDN. So this is something that people can come, and if they don't have the money yet, they can start studying and better themselves as a health coach and a person in the holistic health space. I don't know if an intro to gut health is going to perhaps better you as a person. You could still be mean or nice afterwards, but hey, if your gut's healthy, you might be nicer afterwards, and we'll talk about that today, I'm sure. But also then people that are considering the course, maybe you do have the money, you just don't know if it's for you, you can make an informed decision because you get to start to see the content that we do teach in the course. So remember, whatever we're talking about on this show, the Lunch and Learn, is always going to be higher level than the course, so it's not as specific and detail-oriented is what I mean, and we're never going quite as nerdy as the course. Otherwise, we'd be giving the course away for free. We can't do that, unfortunately. That'd be cool. Can't do that, though. And so if you guys have any questions as we go along, we always encourage engagement with Lunch and Learn, and we typically go for around 30 minutes. All right, so let's jump into it. Lucy, first of all, how are you? How was the long weekend?
It was absolutely beautiful. We're having sky-high temperatures, as usual, in Texas. But I spent a lot of time on the water, so it was good. Thanks for
You weren't
asking.
near those storms, right? I heard some crazy tornadoes came through Arkansas.
Yeah, they were pretty bad. Fortunately, not near where I was. I'm in Austin, but yeah, I heard about some of that yesterday. It sounds absolutely awful. And,
yeah, I'm like a person that is not. I don't find natural disasters particularly fun, and I'm someone that has always liked the Northeast because of that, because you really don't get anything here. Like, yes, we've had some hurricanes, like the back ends of it, right? We've had mini tornadoes that maybe touch a roof or something and like pull off one or two things, but that's about it. So I'm going to Austin, as you know, this week because of Hack Your Health. So we'll see you guys down there hopefully. And I'm like, do I want to go or do I call out sick? like how bad are we talking here?
We don't normally get any we don't normally get things like that in Austin, so you should be good. Like normally the worst we kind of get is like a heavy thunderstorm, but you should be able to cope with that one. I believe in you.
All right, intro to gut health. Here we go. So what I wanted to talk about, Lucy, is, we always mention how we have these foundational labs at FDN. And so just so you guys know, we'll have another episode on this with the Lunch and Learns where we dive deep into the testing itself. This is kind of a philosophy conversation today, like the philosophy around why we look at gut health. And so one of the foundational labs at FDN has always been a stool test to try to get the best insights as to what is going on in someone's gut. And originally, this started out as just a purely stool culture test. So stool culture means that they take your poop and they actually see what grows on it. Now, and then they're using a microscope, of course, but they're not just waiting until it literally grows out that bad. And when they look at that, what they're able to see is, okay, we can see some parasites, we can see bacteria. The issue is when a lot of these organisms or pathogens are exposed to oxygen, most of them actually die. And so the issue with waiting for something to grow always was, okay, well, what can actually grow? Most of it's going to die. So it was never a perfectly accurate way of testing. And just to be clear, at the time of recording this, there is no such thing as a perfectly accurate stool test. There is none on the market, none available anywhere that are 100% accurate 100% of the time. In this area of science, we just continue to do better every single year, and really every decade. We get a little more advanced with it. So one day it might be perfected. I actually don't think that's crazy to say. We actually might perfect this one day, but right now we're not there, and we certainly weren't there just with stool cultures, because again, 95% of the stuff's going to die anyway once it's exposed to oxygen. And of course, you run into something that could be looked at as both a pro and a con. You have humans looking at the things that are growing. So the pro is you don't have technology error because you're looking at it as a human, but now you have human error because we're imperfect as well. So there's kind of some issues with that. And then recently in the last 6-7 years, we've moved more into PCR DNA testing via the GI map. So, again, regardless of the testing that we're using, and perhaps that's premature in this conversation, we can talk about that a little bit later. We always have believed that this is an important area to be testing. So, Lucy, I'll kind of throw it to you. Do you want to talk about why this was probably an area that Reed eventually realized is essential to be testing in everyone, regardless of whether or not it's autoimmune, skin issues, mental health issues, whatever? We got to be looking at the gut.
Yeah, absolutely. Digestion is one of our hidden stresses in HIDDEN that we study. There are around, I think in our microbiome, there's around 10,000 species of bacteria. And that's just on the good side. That's the type of bacteria that we want in our gut. However, as we all know so well, chronic stress leads to dysbiosis, so dysfunction of the gut. Things start to get affected. This leads to things like a weakened immune system, which then can then lead to infections of the GI tract, which then leads to inflammation, which leads to gut permeability, so leaky gut, as it's more commonly talked about, which can then lead to toxicity issues and autoimmune issues. And then all of those combined basically just add up to metabolic chaos. And I think that we can all agree that with that weakened dysbiotic state, you need to test to find out exactly what is going on. This is where we need to correlate to our symptoms. And we can't just guess what is going on. And I think that is something that separates FDNs from other health coaches, because you look just at kind of the regular symptoms, such as, oh, that person is having gas and bloating, so maybe they need to work on their gut microbiome, the balance between good and bad bacteria. But as an FDN, we get to go in and we get to test and find out exactly what is going on. So whether it's parasites, whether we're looking at bacterial balance, fungi, although admittedly the GI map is not the best test for that, but it does give you some kind of idea. It's going to look at viruses. It's going to look at other markers like gut health markers such as inflammation, stomach acid, immune response. So starting with incorporating that in our foundational labs is just a really important part of being an FDN, to try and get to the root cause of what is going on, which is why we do what we do, right?
Yes, absolutely. And from again, going back to that philosophical point of view, it's like we look at this as just one of many things that needs to be looked at. And Reed can always explain this differently and probably better because he's the founder of FDN. But the way that I've always interpreted this is when we're talking about the foundational labs at FDN, we're talking about testing for the areas of the body that are most likely or most often to go haywire or feel the effects of chronic stress. Now, chronic stress can mean a million different things. It can be a psychological trauma. It can be glyphosate, right? It can be chemical induced. There's pain, right? Just not even having your spine structured correctly. There can be a million different things that are causing that stress. But nonetheless, when that stress does happen, okay, here are the systems that start to go awry. You have the stress and hormones, right? Those are going to be, or the stress hormones, sex hormones, I should say, are going to be really out of whack. They're, of course, going to be messed up because if you've been under chronic stress, those are the first things that are going to react. So that's why we test there. You will develop food sensitivities because your gut's messed up. That's why we talked about food sensitivities. And now we're moving to the gut stuff because I think most people in the holistic health space have an understanding that gut health is important. I just don't think they always have the depth of knowledge necessary to actually support everyone. In addition, I think they might look at it as the holy grail and the testing gets taken too far. So what I mean by that is the testing becomes the truth, right? It either showed up on the test or it didn't, and we need to treat the paperwork. And that's another thing we're against as FDNs is we're not treating the paperwork. So just because something came up or didn't come up on the paperwork does not mean that we're taking that as the ultimatum. We're looking at these test results as tools because that's all they are. But we're also trained as FDNs to know these are imperfect tools, as I mentioned before we even really got into the depth of this conversation. I said no stool test is perfect yet. So, for example, if we have someone, if you had, there's still some nuance here, but if you had someone who had like a thick white coating on their tongue and maybe suffered with yeast infections, like vaginal yeast infections constantly, right? So you have a 34-year-old client like that. If that happened and I ran a GI map stool test with them and nothing came back in the fungal section, I can still have the common sense to say, all right, either maybe we run some further testing that could be better for that, or we use, some awareness to say there's probably something going on here. But then, and I never want to confuse people. This is why FDN, you have to understand the philosophy before anything else. Because at the same time, if one sees that, then they say, well, why can't we just treat symptoms? Why can't we just look at the tongue and say, all right, you have fungus. Why are we running a test at all? It's like, well, the body's never that simple. There's other things going on that can be preceding the fungal overgrowth that we need to watch out for too. So just a few things to think about there. And again, at FDN, you're trained to think first and foremost, and then we learn the labs. But first and foremost, you learn how to think about these different things. So I know leaky gut was probably a huge thing for you too, Lucy, especially with your mental health story that you've shared many times on this podcast. So can we talk about leaky gut and like how it correlates with a lot of different disease states?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Ev was saying, and if you are regular listeners, you will know that I suffered and still do to an extent. I'm still actually healing from it. As we've talked about many times, it's a lifelong process. Um, but essentially, with leaky gut, what happens is when stress, as Ev's meant. Sorry, my throat today.
That's okay.
As Ev has mentioned, stress has an impact on the gut. And one of the things that can happen is that in our weakened state, it can actually weaken the lining of the gut. And then what will happen is so mine, I think, came from a lot of antibiotic use as a child. And also, I was put on antidepressants as a child. So I think mine came from overuse of medication, but it can come from many things, whether it's inflammatory food, over exercising, obviously illnesses and diseases. And all of these things basically affect the tight junctions, which are the things that hold the lining of your gut together, essentially. And what can happen is these tight junctions actually stretch out and they literally create a leaky gut. It's almost like having holes in your gut. And then unfortunately, what happens is particles can get through that into your bloodstream that are not meant to get into your bloodstream. And this is one of the issues that we see regularly as FDNs, and it's one of the issues that can kind of go on. Like once you have a leaky gut, it will start to cause problems all over your body in many different areas for various different reasons, whether it's to do with toxicity or just toxins being recirculated, the burden on your liver, not being able to, unfortunately, detox all of the things that are coming through that aren't meant to be there. And it adds to the metabolic chaos that we've talked about. And we basically, with the GI map and improving gut health overall, it's part of one of the areas that we seek to resolve. We want to heal the lining of the gut so that we can actually stop it being leaky. It sounds very basic when I say leaky gut, but that is essentially what it is.
Yeah, what's interesting too for the science nerds out there, which I'd assume you have to be interested in something like this, the Western medicine has acknowledged that most autoimmune cases have a component of intestinal permeability or leaky gut. This is right on PubMed. This is not Evan Transu, Detective Ev opinion. It's right on PubMed. It's really interesting, the studies behind this. And the reason I mention that is because, of course, correlation is not causation, but this is a really profound thing in medicine because they wouldn't view this part about what I'm about to say this way, but this is kind of interesting. I, I still got to be careful because we're live. I will say this: I have consistently seen an ability for those trying to heal leaky gut to heal leaky gut. Like for those that out on the journey to try and take the right actions, they can heal that.
Yeah.
Okay. So now having said that, if if leaky gut seems to almost be a required component in autoimmune disease, again, correlation is not causation, but it seems even in the way the studies pose it that it's required almost as a component of autoimmune disease. But I know for a fact that anyone that I've worked with, including myself, who's tried to heal leaky gut has been successful in that. Well, then you almost have to ask, well, does that make autoimmune disease remission a choice? If the person knows, right? I'm not lessening, of course, if people are dealing with this. I'm not saying you're consciously choosing it, but I'm saying that if one thing was true, would it not mean that the other thing's true? I don't know. I find that pretty interesting. And considering how many people we work with that have been through autoimmune type illness and then thankfully do resolve these things, it's pretty hard to say that maybe you can't do some stuff like that, especially if you're working on this gut stuff. Now, as a quick side note, sorry, I have a little advertisement, Lucy, a live one. For those that love the science side, you might realize sometimes, hey, I'd love to share this science with people. I'd love to be doing this coaching thing with people, but I don't know the business side that well, and I'm not that experienced with it. So if you are looking for some help with the business side, we have our third annual summer open house event coming up in June. Summer open house is free. Don't worry. There's no gimmicks with it. There's no like hidden cost. It's over 25 live events already scheduled. We might actually be able to book in for over 30, but we have over 25 live events scheduled for summer open house. And there are some insider videos into FDN. So you'll get to see like certain things that we do as FDN practitioners in the course, like how we're teaching the trainees, what we get to do as trainees. So you'll get to see all that stuff. But most importantly for you and business is that over 20 of the events are completely around business. So the open house is almost getting to see insider insights into the world of people who do this full time. We actually have a large handful of people who are doing six figures in their FDN business. And we have weekly roundtables with active FDN trainees. So not people that have been graduated for 10 years and, don't remember anything they didn't like about FDN and only have good things to say. We have people that are actively going through it. They're currently paying us, some of them, if they're on payment plans, right? Or they've already paid us somewhat recently in full, and they're going to give you their opinions on the FDN course and what they're learning. So if you'd like to get registered for that, check the comments on either YouTube right now or Facebook and look for a woman named Tracy Williams, and she is commenting there because my chat section is not working on Restream, and the platform that we stream this from, and I don't know why. So on Facebook and YouTube right now, you can look forward to those comments. They'll be coming in just a second, and that link will allow you to register for free for summer open house. Thank you for working with me through my advertisement there, Lucy.
No, I love it. So I can actually see one. You can't see the comments because I can see one question.
Oh, okay. I can't see anything, so that's great that you can. What question do we have?
It's on YouTube. It says, "Can leaky gut be an ongoing issue even when doing all the things to heal it?"
You want to answer that? I have plenty to say with that. So
yeah, I mean, I can start us off. The simple answer is yes. Yes, it can be an ongoing issue. And I think a lot of us, me especially, when we go into this, you think it's going to be healed really fast. You're like, okay, I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to take out gluten. I'm going to take out inflammatory foods. And I'm going to drink bone broth every day. And, obviously there's way more depth to it than that. But it does take some time. If you think about all the damage that has been created over the years, all the damage that you've done from, I don't know, I'll use myself as an example again. Even when I stopped taking, the medication, when I realized I didn't want to be on it and I stopped kind of overtaking antibiotics, I was still drinking alcohol, and I was still, we still live in a world where toxins are coming into our body daily, whether it's just through air pollution or whether it's through like products we put on our face every day. We're still going to be having some kind of toxin intake, and that is going to slow down healing, whether we like it or not. And then there's kind of the lifestyle factors that we need to adjust, like learning to manage stress better, unfortunately, does not happen overnight. Even if we could like snap our fingers and you mentally could handle stress better, your body still also has to catch up, and it has to, your your nervous system has to learn to deal with stress better, and all of those things added up can definitely slow down healing. But as Ev was saying, it's not impossible, not by a long stretch of the imagination. I've worked with people who have managed to do it. I would say I'm 90% there. I'm still working. It's just been a much slower process. I think I must have had an extremely leaky gut. But you take it one day at a time, and you do little by little, and just keep going for it. Anything you'd add, Ev?
Yeah, sure. So, one, if you can't find it on YouTube, apparently we're even having some trouble sending out certain comments on YouTube. So, I'm going to update the description of this as soon as we're done, which is going to be about 11, 10 minutes, 10 minutes basically. And then
Right,
I'm going to update the description so that you guys have the link. So, if you're interested in summer open house, that's how that will work. In regards to the question about leaky gut, and then is it an ongoing thing? This is my personal opinion on it. I would say, especially depending on the country that you're living in, like if you're living in the United States of America, like us, as of right now, with what we choose to do to our food, the environment, all this stuff, I would argue that yes, this is going to be a constant battle. It's not to say that you can't get yourself to a place that you're happy with and that it's working for you. What I'm suggesting is that if you're not continuously conscious about this, it's going to come back. Like you can't just all of a sudden choose to go live the standard American diet again. And I'm not suggesting that this person is saying that either, but certainly if we went back, it's not like this isn't going to happen again. This isn't a once and done type of thing. This is a continuous effort in today's world because we have so many things against us. There's glyphosate sprayed on everything. We
right,
know glyphosate increases intestinal permeability. We know that for a fact. And so it's like, well, I eat organic. I avoid that. It's like, well, the way glyphosate's spreading, it's like it's everywhere. I mean, it's in water in national parks. And the reason I always mention that on this show, if you've heard me say that before, is because we're not really spraying glyphosate in most parts of national parks. I don't know if they're typically doing that at all. I'm wondering maybe they do that on the main parts of the trails that like people visit. I could see us doing something as stupid as that.
good as
But
well.
yeah, but national parks are massive, and so typically it shouldn't be in some beautiful lake, 10 miles away from the main parking lot, and yet it is, and that's because it's in the rainwater. So glyphosate's hitting everything, no matter whether you're eating organic or not. You might be getting less, but you're still getting some of this. And so it's not to scare you. That's not the point at all. But we do need to be conscious of this. We need to be constantly aware and making sure that we're taking proactive steps. And I think for some people, it might be fair to say that we're walking a tighter rope than we'd like to admit, oftentimes. Like for myself, it doesn't take a significant amount of excessive stress before I can start to see, like, all right, there's some symptoms that would be associated with leaky gut happening here, right? Like when I travel, I almost always get one or two small breakouts. Now, this is nothing compared to my skin before, when I'm not trying to be gross. This is actually what happened to me. I mean, I had probably multiple hundreds of breakouts at any given time, but I can kind of see myself when I'm out of my normal routine suffering a little bit in a way that is at least correlative with leaky gut. I mean, having acne is not a diagnosis of leaky gut. That's ridiculous. But it's fair to say that those things are correlated. So I can see small symptoms starting to arise if I go away from my normal routine. And I think that might be a thing for me for a good amount of my life because I like working. I like working a lot. I think it's fun, but that's still stress on the body. My excess pickleball habit is definitely stress on the body, despite how easy it seems. It's a little bit stressful on the body. Okay. So yeah, I would say you got to be conscious of it, but certainly you can get yourself to a place where you're happy and healthy, and you're just going to have to take the steps to maintain it. And Lucy, I want to be blunt with them, right? I mean, would you agree that probably for some people it's a little more effort than for
Oh,
others?
yeah. Yeah, and I would I can't be anything but honest about this
Mhm.
process because I think the worst thing uh, you can go into this process thinking everything is going to be done and one and done in 3 months if I just stick to it 100%. Some people, yes, sure. I'm sure there are some people lucky enough that it's a 3 month process. They can go all in and they, for the most part, healed everything. For some of us, it's probably as everything, it's a lifelong process. But I also think part of it kind of happens naturally when you put that much effort into something. You really start to notice, oh, I feel a bit different. I feel a little bit off today. And you can normally, if you kind of if you work backwards, you can correlate it to something you've done. Oh, I didn't sleep well last night, or I probably had a bit too much sugar, or maybe you had a drink this weekend, or whatever that looks like. You can normally correlate how you're feeling back to that, and then you can course correct. And I think that's the key here. I think the key is focusing on course correction because we're all humans, we're all imperfect. Like, sure, would I love to be dairy free, alcohol free, gluten free, like the absolute perfect epitome of health? Sure, but is that realistic for my life? It's probably not, and I want to enjoy living. So as long as you have that awareness and you have that knowledge, I think that it becomes like a lifelong journey
Mhm.
for sure, in my
Well,
opinion.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that, Maddie, my wife, and I are adopting because she's an FTN as well, is we just said to each other the other day because I thought about this years ago, but when I first started my FTN journey, I mean, I was really young, like, I was 21, I had no money, I didn't have a
Oh,
career
yeah,
going on, like, all these tests were tough, supplements were like, I'm spending everything that I have in my bank account, like, there's nothing left because of the things that I bought this month. Worth it, yes, but it's stressful in its own right, sure. And I guess I had just forgotten about this idea that I had back then because again, it wasn't realistic. But Maddie and I were talking about like, why would we not be just running the foundational tests on ourselves at least once a year? And in theory, because we would prioritize this, you don't have to be made of money to do this, but you certainly have to budget it in. We've gone as far as to saying like, what if we did it once a quarter? What if we did it twice a year, once every 6 months? You know, that's probably about what's reasonable. You don't necessarily need to do like between those two extremes, there's a place where it's useless. It's not like necessarily useful to test every day, for example, but
right.
somewhere between there and a year, there's probably an extra benefit in maybe every several months or 6 months.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to start doing that because even if you feel great, you can measure where you're at. There's no perfect test out there for leaky gut per se, but one of the tests we will talk about in a future lunch and learn, it might not be until the teens, but we will talk about it, is our MBA. So it's not a business degree, but it's a mucosal barrier assessment that we do consider one of our foundational tests. And what that test does is it dots the I's and crosses the T's that the GI map cannot. So GI map's a fantastic test. This is just the places where we kind of fill in those loose holes or loose gaps or whatever you want to say. And so when we look at that, we're actually able to quantify with a fair degree of accuracy how leaky is your gut because we kind of know that it's leaky, right? We all live in today's world. I mean, you can kind of assume that you have increased intestinal permeability, but it's good to know, are we at, are we sitting at a 10 out of 10? Are we sitting at a 2 out of 10? And are we making progress? Did it get
Right.
worse from last year or better? That's important. So, did any more? I still can't see the chat. I've never had this happen. Did anything else come up?
There was another question that was, how hard is it to heal leaky gut? But I feel like we covered that when we were talking about it being
Yeah.
an ongoing issue. It, it's a process, I would say.
Yeah. It really depends on why, I would say. Like, if you're someone that is dealing with it primarily, like someone who has celiac, interestingly, celiac basically is an autoimmune disease that causes intestinal permeability in a sense. Now, there is a doctor out there that just cringed because that is not the technical way to explain celiac at all. So I'm not saying that that's the medical way, but I am saying that when you kind of think about what it's doing, it's an autoimmune disease that it directly attacks the small intestine and it ruins the microvilli. It does damage the gut. So we know that it causes intestinal permeability. So let's
Mm,
say someone was truly celiac and maybe gluten was their biggest thing. Otherwise, they're a pretty stress-free person. They eat overall well. They're doing okay. Maybe they were even eating organic wheat. Well, you remove that, their gut could turn around pretty fast. Thank God, the gut lining are some of the fastest regenerating cells in the body. That's something to rejoice in. Is that this is one of the fastest healing parts of the body. So that might be simple. But what if I've been sick for 15 years? Now I've developed a bunch of food sensitivities. My life's stressful as can be. I still got all these bills I got to pay. I got medical debt now, and I've developed bacteria and parasites because of my leaky gut. Solvable? Yes, 100%. A lot of people come to us like that, by the way. So don't worry. But
right.
longer, yeah. And you need to be realistic with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So it looks like there was another question. What are some good anti-parasites to use for worms? So FDN, we don't. That is something. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Ev, but you would need to go through the course to learn about. We don't. We wouldn't give out random recommendations for worms specifically and anti-parasites.
That is true. I'd look. We can hint them though. I'd look in the direction of a lot of our graduates, like Cellcore, um, biocidin, mixed in with several other things could be useful. But Lucy is definitely correct in terms of the foundationals that we teach at FDN because if you just go after parasites, or you just go after fungus, or you just go after bacteria, you are usually going to find yourself very disappointed after several months. How many of you? Oh my gosh, I'd be curious if anyone actually. I wish I could see the chat, but if anyone wants to put this in the comments, even if you're watching afterwards, I always read this stuff. I'd love to know how many of you have done like a quote unquote candida cleanse. Right, that was something that I did before I got into this, and like I felt a little better while I was on it, and the second I stopped that candida diet, I felt like crap again. and had to do other stuff. And it's because the candida in itself was a symptom of other things. Sometimes the parasites, believe it or not, in a sense can be a symptom. The bacteria can be a symptom because of like what even allowed it to happen to begin with.
Right.
So again, we're not trying to beat around the bush, but we want to give you an accurate answer. You can go spend a lot of money on these cleanses. And if I had to spend money on just one thing, I probably would look in the direction of a Cellcore or Biocidin. But I would do it with a very strong disclaimer, like huge asterisk next to it, that you might find that it worked a little bit while you were on it, and then you feel like crap afterwards a few months later. Best case scenarios, of course, that doesn't happen and you do feel great, but I would think that you're probably in a minority if that's all you ever did. So think about what allowed your body to even be in a state that it says, okay, we can't kill this parasite when we got exposed to it, because mostly our stomach acid should do that. And then not only could we not kill it, we've allowed it to grow a home here and actually become problematic. If you think about that, there's your anti-parasitic. Okay. It's
That's
amazing how easy it is to get to 30 minutes, especially when you're with me, right, Lucy?
just how way.
He's like giving me the eye, like, well, yeah, it's easy for some of us, Have. Cool. Well, we love doing these lunch and learns with you. And next time, what we will be doing for lunch and learn number 7 is we'll be kind of diving deeper into the testing that we use. So this was just an intro to gut health, explaining why it's important. And we're going to be breaking down some markers next time on the GI map. And again, why we use that. This will be one where we share our screen with you guys. So definitely try to check us out on YouTube for that one if you can. If you are listening to this on audio or afterwards, definitely check out our summer open house event. I'm going to go and update the descriptions on both Facebook and YouTube right now, so you have the link. And if you're listening to this audio a week into June, because that might be when this comes out, well, you still probably have 15 to 20 events left to consume. So it's free. Definitely come join us. But Lucy, thank you. And I will see you. Well, I'll see you soon, but I'll see you next week, at least as far as the